Hey, listeners, are you getting inspired to dive deeper into your learning of EFFT? If so, head on over to Catherine's website to check out her list of upcoming trainings. Some trainings are focused on combining EFFT with young kids and EFFT play therapy. So head on over to her website and we hope to see you in the future. Check it out at KATHRYNDEBRUIN.com, CatherineDeBruin.com, and we hope to see you in the future.
Welcome to the Family Express podcast, where our destination is resilient and connected families. Come aboard with your hosts, marriage and family therapists Catherine DeBruin and Rhonda Evans, to explore the world of emotionally focused family therapy, a model developed by Sue Johnson and colleagues. Together with our guest speakers, our travels will map the EFFT landscape, highlighting lessons learned, shared fears, and the passion and curiosity that bonds our community.
Welcome back, listeners, to the next episode of the Family Express podcast with Catherine and Rhonda. We are excited for our conversation today. And before I get into that, I just want to give a big thank you to our listeners for tuning in and listening to our stories and checking in with our guest speakers and listening to their wisdom as Catherine and I add more episodes. It's just amazing to know that you all are out there listening. So just a little bit of a thank you up front to everybody for tuning in. Our guest speaker today is Rikki Kumar. And Rikki, you have a couple of different credentials, so give me a moment. You are a registered psychotherapist in Canada. You're a registered clinical counselor in Canada, and you're a Canadian certified counselor. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Rhonda. I am very excited to talk about EFT and EFFT in this case. I'm a bit of a newbie to the EFFT scene.
Yay, welcome, welcome newbies. All are welcome here. So let's just kind of start off with, let's hear about how you got tuned into EFFT. Where did you start and what brought you to EFFT?
Well, it's interesting. I was thinking about this yesterday as this podcast was coming up, and you know how we seed attachment earlier on in the process. I remember my first ever externship, and we were doing stage 2, and I had a moment where I was like, at the time there were things happening in my family of origin, and so I wasn't thinking of my partner. I was thinking of a parent, and in that moment, I thought, gosh, it feels like there's something here to do with my family, but we're talking about partners. And then that was it. It was like a small little blip, and kind of stayed there for years. And then I remember doing volunteering at an externship, and on the last day, they gave us a little bit of a teaser of EFFT. George Fowler showed this video of him working with a family. And I was like, wow, I've been looking for this. I didn't even realize I was looking for this. You know, it just suddenly clicked into place. Um, so again, at the time because my training was very individual focused, and then EFT is what brought the couples in for me. So I was still a bit hesitant going into EFFT, but it was always there in the back of my head that, I want to take that leap. I want to take that leap someday. And I did some time ago take that leap. And I think I did my very first training with Gail and yourselves, Catherine. And it was phenomenal, because immediately I saw it translating into even my individual and couple work. Yeah.
Oh, Rikki, it's so lovely to have you here. I'm glad you took the leap. I remember you from that training. That's actually where I said, I've got to get Rikki on this podcast, because you stood out in terms of trying to integrate the material, asking thoughtful questions. And so I'm really eager to know, how has this transition been? As you've been moving over, you said you didn't realize you needed it until you took the training. Something spoke to you. But how has it been to start learning EFFT?
I remember, I'm just thinking about back when I took level 1 with you. And at the time, I was working with a couple, and it was kind of, end of stage 1, that murky waters between sort of stage 1 and 2. And there's something there that I couldn't quite name. And I'd just come off the EFFT training, and the couple that I was working with, one of the contents was their cycle around parenting. And, you know, I thought for a moment, okay, let me try this thing that I've just learned. I know that, I want to see this as content, but at the same time, what if part of this is very specific to their view of themselves as parents? So I kind of honed in on not just their view of self as partners to each other, which I had tried quite a bit working, but there's a stuckness. And when I went in there, one of the partners started to share his fear about, I don't want to, 20 years down the line, and they had a 3-year-old. I don't want to see him mistreating you. I don't want to see him walking all over you. I've seen that in my family. And I don't want him to turn into a spoiled child. I want him to be a very successful young man so all of these sort of things that were kind of like a mix of, his care for his partner, but also care for his child, and view of himself as sort of not, as sort of failing both his partner and his child, that were coming up. And so I was able to take that little sliver of the work from Parenting Alliance and just sort of slide that in, and just sort of clicked into place. And he was able to enact that, and suddenly the partner could hear him. She's like, okay, now I get it. Now I get it. And then they were able to accept the reframe in step 4 for EFCT. And I was like, oh, this is the little piece that I was missing. And then we went into stage 2 work. I don't know if that's perfect according to case conceptualization, but I found that very useful with their work, and I would be curious to hear your thoughts as experienced practitioners.
I think you're marking that first moment in an EFFT session where you can go in like one of two directions. And the family certainly can be focused on behavior or content. And there's such a draw, and there's so much anxiety that's built up around that it's very tempting to go and focus on that. And honestly, I've gone down that road many, many times. And there was something in you that got curious and said, oh, hold on. Yes, this content's important, but is there also a relational attachment dynamic here, a process that's playing out between the caregiving and care receiving system, right? And hey, you see, you gave yourself some pause in that moment to even think about that. I mean, way to go.
Yeah, and that really helped. That really, really helped. And then we went on and continued couples work, because it wasn't as big a part of their work, the family work. So that instantly helped me. I didn't have to send them to another family therapist. I could just, for that little one session, work on their Parenting Alliance and help them be there for each other and understand each other. So that was very helpful, because I remember, I saw, Catherine, one of your, it was a self-paced EFFT and play therapy course that you have. And in there, I saw you were, there were many elements to it, bringing in and consulting different practitioners, occupational therapists, many other things. But one of the things I noticed is, because the child was so young, the focus was primarily on the Parenting Alliance, whereas if it's adult children, then, or even children who are able to articulate more, say in 12, 13 and such, I might have them eventually be more vulnerable in stage 2 and articulate. But quite a big facet of is working on the Parenting Alliance, the younger they are. So I found that really helpful, and that was part of what really informed my thinking in that curiosity. So I really, really appreciate that. Yeah. And even, in fact, EFFT, I was working with a client who was bringing in his anxiety around parenting, and it really helped me to get curious about his view of self as a parent, as a father, to go in and see what what's there, what's that feeling that drives this negative pattern, at the end of which he feels frustrated as his own young adult child. Um, so again, these are things that I didn't quite expect, but now I look back and I go, I mean, duh. Of course, these are
Mm.
parenting and child, whether it's an adult child or a young child, these dyads are just as much an important part of our clients' lives. I mean, everyone's at least been a child in their
Yeah,
life. So,
exactly.
yeah.
Oh my gosh, Rikki, I love the way that you put things. I love the philosophical, bigger picture that I'm hearing from you, which is whether we're working with an individual in EFFT, whether we're working with a couple who also happen to be parents, whether we're working with the whole family, we have access to the intrapsychic and the interrelational. And that's the beauty of attachment theory, is that John Bowlby said that our interactions relationally will drive our personality, and that doing good therapy or having corrective experiences in relationships can also make changes to our intrapersonal world. And so you're right, like whether whoever we're working with, whatever unit is sitting in front of us, we have access to those relationships, right? Like in EFFT, we're always talking about who is the cast of characters who's actually invisibly sitting in the room with us. And I remember studying Bowenian theory and Murray Bowen saying, even if you're working with an individual in the room, you're still working systemically as long as you're considering the context as you work with this person. So anyway, as we're talking philosophy here, Rikki, it's easy to see why you could make that bridge over from individual therapy to working with families, because you are thinking systemically along these lines. And I also really like what you said about EFFT when it comes to young children, that in any EFFT, we're going to be focused on the caregiving system, but even more so, especially with younger children, because we expect parents to be the ones who figure out what's going on with that kiddo, because they can't understand themselves. They don't have abstract thinking. They don't have language. And often there's neurological issues that are coming up in those first 3 years that have to be deciphered. And so, yeah, the focus really is more heavily on the parenting, right?
Yeah, because parents are, I mean, the primary attachment figures, and they are in some ways the biggest environmental factors. I mean, that they are their children's worlds for the first few years of their lives, and um, there's no discounting that. In fact, that's what makes them important, and that's why we privilege them. And as you were talking, just something else came to mind in terms of philosophy. I remember, although my initial training, the program wasn't heavily focused on working with couples and families. It was more individual focused, but we did have some courses on systemic thinking. And I think one of the draws for me was also to EFFT was it didn't clash so much with. So I come from a collectivistic background, and and I always, like, I have sometimes a bit of a resistance or a hard time with the idea of uh, um, how do I say this? It's not that individuation is bad. In fact, that needs to happen. The launching needs to happen. In fact, I have personal experience of struggling with that, where in a collectivistic background, it was oftentimes like people would see it as abandoning your parents, and but to sort of have this spin where it didn't feel that my cultural background was pathologized, that I was, um, that my attachment to my parents or my parents' attachment to me and wanting to have some influence or wanting to have some involvement in each other's lives is a very normal thing, and it's hard during transition periods when we go from one stage life to another. Um, the um, the hold me tight equivalent for families, hold me tight and let me be, or let me go, or let me be me. That comes to mind as I'm talking about this. And so I guess if I were to really tie it together, what I really liked about EFFT is it works really well with the idea that, if parents are feeling, um, even though they're in a reactionary place, even though they might feel a sense of like, um, they might be doing these things that to us on the outside are like, oh my gosh, you're really crossing all the boundaries. And fair enough, there are things that just shouldn't be done. And there's an impact it has on a child, but like to be able to have that kindness and compassion for the parents and see the parental intent underneath, the positive intent of wanting to have some sort of influence in terms of keeping the child safe or okay or good and safe. And like that was again another thing that really spoke to me because um, somehow, and it could be the way that it was presented to me, some of the theories that I saw systemically, it felt like I was being told that I came from a dysfunctional culture. Um, so it was very what's the word, validating to know that this is actually that's also what draws me to attachment theory, is it's a universal thing. No matter what cultural background, we're all wired to want connection. And then of course that starts with our very first people, right? Our parents. And so anyways, that's philosophy just sort of made me go there. Yeah.
I would just love to respond to that, Rikki, because there are really important foundational attachment concepts in that that I that is one of the reasons why as soon as I found EFT, I just I just couldn't look away. There just wasn't anything else for me. Um, the fact that it is so non-pathologizing, and so for you, coming from a collectivistic culture where maybe there were other approaches that you were getting messages that your culture does it wrong, or there's a pathology around that. And I had a similar experience as well, just realizing how validating EFT is, whether that's the culture, whether that's parenting, responses, close-knit families, what that can look like. Culturally, it can look different from culture to culture. What is a close-knit family? And it's all acceptable because it all makes sense in context, right? And that can make sense in a cultural context, a multi-generational context, multi-generational household. It's just so validating. And to me, I think that's just one of the beauties about the universality of attachment is it's so kind because it makes so much sense. It just makes so much sense that parents can come in reactive because they're so vulnerable. Like being a parent is a hard job, and it's a job that many people sign up for. And then when you get in the job, you find out how hard it is. Like no one can really tell you in advance just how hard it is. And it can be very humbling to go to a family therapist and say, can you help me? Can you help my family? And there's such a kindness that the family is met with when it comes to EFFT. They're just met in such a kind way. And that again is why I couldn't turn my back on attachment, and I couldn't look away from EFFT. And so my heart is just so warmed that you had a similar experience, that EFFT is so kind, and that it was a place where you felt validated as a family system and how your family looks and works, and as a culture and how your culture looks and works. That just really warms my heart.
Thank you.
Listeners, check out our book for children, children of any age. It's called A Jumble of Thoughts and a Tangle of Feelings. It's on Amazon.com. If you know a child out there who is having a tough time, but unable to put that distress into words, this book is your guide to helping them figure out what is going on. Whether you're an educator, a therapist, or a parent, we really think this will be a helpful guide for you.
Yeah, it's been. I find that we're always encouraged to also reflect on ourselves. Quite a bit of in supervision, we often talk about self of the therapist, and quite a lot of the times, I would, when I find myself stuck, I kind of go back to what it is about it that makes me feel stuck, and at times it can be linked to things that I've experienced in my own family of origin. And I must say, like, even over the last few years, as I've been practicing EFT with couples, individuals, and now families, it's impacted my own personal relationships. And I think I've heard a lot of my colleagues say the same. But I find that in my family of origin as well, I've seen things shift, because like when one person shifts a little bit, it feels like the whole family system shifts. And I feel like, on having had that sort of firsthand experience, I feel very hopeful about the process and trying to support families in that process. Yeah.
That's really exciting, Rikki. Your first shift with a family, can you tell us a little more about that? Sounds like a story to remember forever.
Oh dear. The first one, it's been some time, so I don't have it as fresh in my mind. I hope it's okay if I bring in the one that I literally had last week, because let me tell you, um, it wasn't. Is that okay if I talk about the one from last week?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Any story like that, we can
Yeah.
focus on. It will be an inspiration.
Oh, the reason I'm talking about this one is it's fresh in my mind, and I remember uh, kind of coming out of that session feeling a bit bewildered and feeling these things like, gosh, Rikki, you couldn't figure it out. And, all these sort of like sent feelings of inadequacy as a therapist, as trying to support them. And, and EFFT being a growing edge for me. And then I almost had to sort of slow it down and check in with myself and go, oh, is this familiar? I know this one. I remember feeling quite a lot like this when I started working with couples. Um, and I remember what my supervisor helped me do at the time. And of course, I have my supervision planned for later this week with my EFFT supervisor. And I'll be doing the same thing that I did back then with my couples therapist supervisor. And she helped me slow down. And I started to do that a bit myself because of having had that practice before. I was like, oh, there was something there that happened for me where I couldn't quite come in fast enough to reflect and validate when I'm tracking and move on. This is another thing I love is it's not that all the things that I learned in my EFCT and EFIT experience are just gone. Poof, they're there. And I was able to kind of go, okay, looks like something happened there. I'm going to go watch the video at that specific spot and see if I can find where it started to kind of, where did the cycle start and where did I miss it in the room? Where did it start to go live? And where could I have validated the caregiving and the care-seeking intent a bit more? And then, so that's what I'm hoping to do later this week with my supervisor. And yeah, I suppose another challenge, and you're talking about first sessions, I think one of the first things that comes to mind I remember being nervous about in my first session was, gosh, I'm going to have 5 people in my room. I'm only used to 2 at the most. I'm going to have 5 people, 3 young adults, some of them very close to my age, and then 2 parents. And and then somehow I almost had to say to myself, kind of like what you were saying, Rhonda, the fact that they're coming to you, um, as parents, it's got to be hard, you know? It's got to be so hard for them. So humbling in some ways. And I saw them walk through the door, and I saw them, and they were closer to my parents' age than me. And I, as a young therapist, I almost had to go, the fact that they're doing this must mean so much to them. And so I got to be kind. I got to make sure I'm there for the parents. Um, and I guess in that instance, I was able to ask that question that Jim and Gail often talk about, what's one word? How would you describe what it's like to be you in the family, or if you could use a word? Um, and that session went fairly smoothly. And then I have the session from last week, you know, where it's just I had a dyad in the room, and somehow it was still hard. So I guess what the contrast does for me is there are times where even um, something that technically should be easier because it's easier to contain or so may be harder. And that simply is perhaps a combination of the fact that I'm looking at a cycle that's been around for 40 years.
Mm.
And, much like working with couples, I have to give myself some compassion and say, Rikki, as much as it would be wonderful to have a magic wand, they're here and they're working really hard, and they're really stuck, and you're feeling their stuckness. That's what you're feeling. And it's okay. And you know what? Maybe with some support, you can help them. With some support from your supervisor, with some support from self-reflection and kind of looking at your tape, maybe you can go back and help them again and again and kind of just keep trying. So that was, I guess, in terms of challenges, there can be so many challenges, but that's kind of what I keep coming back to.
Gosh, Rikki, it's really fun getting to know you. And you're talking about individuals, couples, parents, families, and just the courage that it takes to sit down in the room with, up to 5 people or more at a time. And as you're talking, I feel like you've got your cast of characters with you. Like you're clearly like so intentional about the work you do. You slow down, you bring your curiosity that comes from your philosophy, and you've got your supervisors on hold. You are taping your work. You go and find the stuck spot and rewatch it with support if you need to. And you've also got the self of therapist part where you can feel in session if things are feeling, strange or off, or you even had the ability to reflect on, oh, this is a familiar feeling that I felt when I was learning couples therapy. Wow. Like you are really in touch with the self of the therapist. You've got your support there as you're taking on another model. This is remarkable again, like what is this? Just your level of intentionality in learning your work.
Catherine, first of all, that's very validating to hear that. It's very soothing to hear that I am trying my best to do right by my clients. And I think that's where the fire somewhat comes for me from, is this place of like, um, you know, I suppose and this is perhaps a bit of a personal thing, that there was a time in my life where I wish um, I had access to someone who could support me and understand me, and possibly support and understand my parents. And for us to have that conversation that could be reparative. I don't know if that's the right word, reparative, but helpful to repair. And I mean, I'm still, our profession is still the country. So I come originally from India, and it's still developing there. There's still a lot of stigma around it. My parents are just beginning to understand what I do for a living. Um, so
Oh, how
it's
interesting.
yeah. So I think the fire for me comes from, I really I am trying to make the changes I can right now in my life, but it's been part of the process has been sort of grieving the loss of, I wish I had that for myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to take that and then to turn around and go, well, what can I do about it?
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
So,
Yeah. What a
which,
beautiful way to live, right? Like how amazing to recognize that and then have the privilege of being in this profession and being able to do this, right? In a country, you live in Canada, right? In a
yeah, I live in
country,
Canada now, but I'm still involved with
in,
projects in India. Yeah.
okay, yeah. Wow. I mean, I remember finding out when I remember going to college to study social work. And at the end of my social work course, there was one, like, what do you call it, credit that was family therapy. And I was fascinated. Like, I didn't know this kind of thing existed. And from that moment, I knew, oh my word, I want to do stuff with families. And that was in South Africa. And then when I came to the States and I found out that there was a track called marriage and family therapy, I thought I died and gone to heaven. And and then as I was studying family therapy, then I reflected on being a little girl and wishing that we had had a family therapist and thinking of the conversations we could have had. And I literally remember sitting in a lounge with my mom and my aunt, and they would always talk like psychology kinds of stuff. But if we had just had this knowledge, like our conversations could have been so transformational, reparative. I like that word. Yeah. So I'm just resonating with you. I have that inside of me too. And I'm like, okay, well, I can hopefully help families to have those conversations now.
Thank you for sharing that. Oh, it's very normalizing that um so many of us have these experiences. Um, I suppose the age-old can't remember if it would be called an adage or perhaps not
Mhm.
adage, but like the wounded healer. That phrase somehow pops to mind, and it doesn't have to be severely wounded, but some sort of experience where we think, "Gosh, wouldn't it have been nice?" And
Yeah.
maybe I can offer that to others,
Yeah.
and do in a world where there's, I mean, at the summit last year, there was this thing about uncertainty in the world,
Yeah.
and so. And we've at our clinic we've been talking about this quite a bit, what it boils down to is, what can I do as an individual, the little things, little bits of kindness or little bits of good that I can put into the world that can hopefully have some ripple effects and impact the lives of other people. And it's a very systemic way of thinking, perhaps, is
Yeah.
hopefully we can start to then shuffle the things that are stuck in the system, and hopefully over time that can be third order change.
Oh,
A kinder world. Yeah.
ooh. Is that a thing? Third order change? I've never heard that. Did you
I
make
I
that up?
have I've only just heard about it fairly recently. So I don't know how much of a thing it is already or not. Maybe if I don't know if Rhonda, you've heard of it.
No, I haven't, but I think it's a beautiful earth goal.
Love
Yeah,
it. I love it.
yeah.
No, Rikki, I mean, I think it's profound what you're saying, right? That notion of the wounded healer. Rhonda and I are studying with a lady called Dr. Patricia Crittenden, and she's done a lot of research in this area in various countries in the world around the helping professionals, particularly in the world of psychology. And when she did AAIs, adult attachment interviews on the psychologists or us, therapists, she found that we're some of the most broken people. So there's actually research proving it. And here's what's important is that we come to this profession from a very deep place. We therefore have amazing attunement and compassion to lean into people, but we do have to do our own work. And when we are studying these models, I mean, we are healing ourselves. I've gotten so much healing in the EFT community with mentors and colleagues, just being able to work on and redo relationships and see myself differently and grow and heal. And so the healers that are out there that are not doing their own work, we have to be careful of, working through our clients, projecting onto them, not seeing things clearly. So yeah, as you're doing that internal work, paying attention to the self of therapists, learning the skill set, thinking systems, we're healing ourselves. And then hopefully we're bringing change to family systems, and one relationship at a time. That does have a ripple effect across family, across countries, across the world. Third order change. Wow, I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll have to go Google it now to figure out what exactly, because I remember hearing it in circles around. I was like, ooh,
yes,
that sounds
yes,
interesting.
yes. Well, because, when people talk about that, and we can be idealistic and talk about it. And when I've sort of talked idealistically about it, people have shot me down and said, that's sort of like magical thinking. But it can be done, right? If we're thinking that as we're doing this work, it's changing. It doesn't change our genes, but it changes our trauma that then isn't transmitted to the next generation. It does change relationships as we lean in with love and help people see themselves differently. And then little by little, that can affect a lot of people, right? Across time.
Break this cycle.
Yeah, exactly.
I think one of the last things I would want to say is I really appreciate you saying that it's important to do our own work, and not let it somehow interfere or negatively impact our clients. I think that is so important that you said that, because if we lose our own emotional balance, then it can be very hard for us to be the stronger, wiser other, the transitional attachment figure for the client. And so, absolutely, I have my own, as you were saying earlier, cast of characters in my head, my mentors and my supervisors who are sort of in the back of my head or right by my shoulder. I usually imagine them sort of whispering into me, or sometimes I imagine
the same thing, Rikki. I have the same thing. They sit on my shoulder.
I sometimes imagine Sue whispering, just by watching her videos. I never got to meet her in person. I almost did, and then I didn't. So I almost have, from watching her work, whispering into my ear, exquisite logic, Rikki, exquisite logic. There's always an exquisite logic, and lean in with curiosity. So, yeah, I definitely think it's so important to have that emotional balance and to check in with ourselves when we start to lose it, because if we lose it, then we'll be there for our client in this room as they're in that very vulnerable place. And so thank you for saying that.
Thank you for being with us, friend. This is really fun. And as I'm seeing you right here, I'm imagining your little cast of characters on your shoulder, and I just love that image. My husband a few years ago went to New York City for some like corporate event, and they did they took all the CTOs out, and they took them to like the studio where they had a miniature made of each of them just to show them the technology was possible. And so my husband, I have a little, what would you call this? 3 inches?
Mhm.
I have a little statue of Etienne in 3 inches. It's hilarious. So anyway, play therapist. I was like,
Love it.
I'm going to get all my mentors made into little statues and make a little cast of characters and put them in my office.
I love it. Lego minifigs.
Hilarious. Now I will always look at you and see that on your shoulder, I hope.
Thank you.
Aw.
And you're part of the you're part of the cast of characters, you know? I still remember that training, you know, and I
Wow.
went back into that session and I imagined you and Gail talking about, you know, care seeking, caregiving, and you know, it's there. It's real for me. So
Wow, that's something.
thank you.
Now I'm speechless. Thank you.
Well, what a fantastic conversation. And I just love where it went. Catherine and I, we never quite know where the conversations will go, but they always go somewhere really beautiful and relational. And so thank you so much, Rikki, for sharing your heart with us today. And I think you and I have more in common than you probably realize. And I'm happy to share that with you at some point in the future. Because I definitely have them on my shoulder as well. And I actually, in the play therapy training, we had to draw that. And so I put mine on my shoulders like a star and a heart and a diamond, and it represented them symbolically. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I love that. That's a good idea. Well, thanks.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you. It's been such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
That's it for today, folks. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again for our next journey.